I had the great fortune to share dinner with Chris a few weeks ago as we prepared for this service. Sitting between other patrons at the bar of the cheese shop, we talked and got to know each other. I asked if she was from Des Moines. She asked me where I fell in the birth order of my family. I asked her about her job and found out that she had found her way into marketing, sales, purchasing, and many other roles in her 24 years at her company. At some point over these hot skillets of macaroni and cheese, I shifted our conversation to the other reason that we had gathered, which was planning for the service today. I asked if she'd be willing to write a reflection. I told her the guiding question was, what has opened you up and helped you grow? People often say that pain and despair are the greatest teacher, but it seems to me that love ought to be considered one of our great teachers as well. So I asked her if there were any experiences of great love teaching her that she would want to share in the service today. To be fair, up to this point, we were sitting at a bar, right, at the cheese shop. There are people right next to us. This was the first real conversation we had ever had, so I took no real risks. I shared nothing too personal. I was playing it very safe. But Chris, when I offered this opening, she decided to not only talk about the love that had helped her grow in her family and being a parent, knowing that I'm an expectant parent, but she also shared about the pain that had hurt her before. She led our conversation beyond just these masks of niceties into the truth and complexity that is often our lives. She took the risks. She guided the path. And I just sat there feeling proud. Proud to be in the company of a brave soul, a compassionate soul, who can name her own story without shame, without fear, and with the pride that she had walked through her own life experience in a way that led to her courage, her perseverance, and her honesty to create a home with Bill and her daughters that she was proud of. She started her story talking about the pain that had motivated her to reach out and seek help, but her story didn't stop there. I kept thinking about this because if it were just, you could say, okay, so pain was one of the great teachers in her life. But I hate that saying, and it really irks me because I don't think it really reflects the whole story. Because if pain were the only teacher in Chris's life, she might have opted to never go on that date with Bill in the first place. She could have learned from pain that connection brings more pain. So what was it that called her to see if connection could also bring something else? And so I asked, what motivated you to try again after you had been hurt so deeply? I asked because, as I said, that statement irks me, but also because it's something that has intrigued me for such a long time. I know that pain in my life has demanded that I deal with whatever issues it's presenting. But this makes pain a demanding teacher, not necessarily a great teacher. If pain were a great teacher, we'd expect to see that all of the students of pain have learned something worthwhile out of it. But I'm not convinced that we all do. There are people in my life, and I'm sure in yours too, people whom we love dearly, who are entirely lovable, who simply won't date anymore because they can't believe it could bring them anything other than pain. There are others I know, and probably you too, who are miserable in their marriages and always have been. But they don't talk about it with their spouse or anyone else or leave because they can't imagine that it would help and that anything could be different. Or maybe it's someone's relationship with their work, or their dynamic with their mother, or their boss, or their cat. Who knows? What have you? Some people in the experience of pain, they have learned that it's better to not try anymore. It might be true to say that for some people, pain has been a pivotal teacher, but what it taught them to do is to quit. Pain may test and challenge us, but it doesn't require that we open and have one particular answer. We decide what we learn from pain. And I just think some of pain students are getting it wrong and failing the test. My life has shown me that if I choose incorrectly how to respond to pain, pain will keep on showing up until I get it right. But again, that's not necessarily the sign of a great teacher, just a patient one. If pain is such a great teacher, I would expect to see less and less clear examples of pain in society and in people's lives. I would expect to see that we as a species have learned something better by now, that we would stop hurting each other. But we haven't. I haven't. Even though my greatest desire in life is to alleviate suffering and to foster healing and the enjoyment of this mystery and gift of life, I too am sometimes unnecessarily short with customer service agents on the phone. To my great embarrassment. But also not just that, also with the people I love dearly, including my husband. It's really hard to transform one's fears and the anger that surfaces from unmet needs into productive and respectful communication every single time, right? And yet I recognize it's not about perfection, it's about progress. Perhaps it's more about our ability to course correct when we find ourselves straying from the kind of love we want to bring into the world, about course correcting and acknowledging our mistakes. I have, sadly, too many examples of this in my life. And as you know, I just said I am pregnant, and I have had some pretty wonderful mood swings during this most hormonal experience. And sadly for my husband, I can act like a toddler, where I save all my good behavior for the public, and when I come home, I am just worn out and cranky at times. And we were having some plumbing issues in our house, like maybe a month ago. And I had talked to the people at, Ace Hardware about what it might be, and I went back again after I tried that and it didn't work, and we ruled out some things. They told me what to do. I came home, I told my husband, he called the plumber to set up the appointment. And then he proceeded to talk to the plumber about the things that I had already ruled out. And I just fumed. And he had to say to the plumber, "Excuse me, I'm going to have to call you back." And as I was saying, I've already ruled that out. I talked to the people at the hardware store. I can't believe you would even raise that question. What are you thinking? Oh, wait a second, maybe you're thinking that it's good to get a second opinion, and perhaps I'm overreacting right now, and I'm being really rude, and I'm just worked up, and I don't know how to stop, but I've got to. And I love that in the midst of my hearing my own voice, I just think, wow, she's lost it. That I could stop myself. But it also helps that the whole time I was going off at my husband, he just sat there and he smiled at me. He could have reacted. He could have taken it personally. This is not the first time I've doubted his ability to deal with a household issue. But he didn't take the bait. And he just gently smiled at me. And it gave me a little space to see and hear myself and course correct. I'm able to admit these things in part because it does cause me pain when I treat other people like this. But I was also able to notice it because the way he was looking at me. I know that he loves me. The fact that someone knows me so fully in all of my messiness is unbelievable. That he still loves me. And the only way I can really accept that is when I know that that is how I feel for him. I don't expect him to be perfect in order to be lovable. And when I remember that that is also how he feels about me, it helps me forgive myself, to love myself enough that I can readily admit I'm being a jerk. And then I can course correct. I'm allowed to admit my faults and to own them. I'm encouraged, actually. When I acknowledge his dignity and how I just trounced all over it, he opens up his arms to me in an instant. And this is the kind of love that encourages me to grow. It's not pain. It's not shame. It's not fear that opens me and calms me to change. It is the presence of love. It's warmth. It's understanding. It's this lure of connection that calls me to be my better self. I want more goodness in my life. I want to know the fullness of love that I can hold. And the best way that I've found to learn about that is when I choose it, because then I get to live within love. There's no guarantee, however, that the next time I will choose love. There's no guarantee that any of us will, that when we meet with pain, we will have the capacity to respond with love. And I have long wondered why, in those moments, sometimes can we choose it and other times we can't, regardless of how whoever is around us is responding. And so I asked Chris this kind of annoying and persistent challenge in my life. Chris, why did you do it? Why did you choose to open to love again after you had been hurt? And as we heard her say earlier, that she decided to take the risk because she was sick and tired of living an unhappy life. On the outside, she said everything looks like it was fine, things are going well, but that was a coping skill she learned earlier in her life. She wanted to actually and sincerely be happy from the inside out. When I hear this, I hear, yes, she was tired of pain's lessons and she was willing to try something new, but pain only brought her to the crossroads, and then she had to choose which way to turn. Pain can show us limits, missteps, or crossed boundaries, but I believe it is love that guides us to check out some new territory, to make room for risking a new behavior, a new way of being. When we are young, adults model for us the complexities of love, but at some point, we venture in for ourselves and we start experimenting. We begin not really knowing what it is, no matter how many positive examples or negative examples we may have seen. We don't really know, and we wonder, am I in love? In my experience, how will I know if he really loves me? How will we know? And what will happen if we say it to someone else? What will happen? I remember my first love in high school. He lived up the hill and around the corner in our neighborhood. And his mother would joke years later that before we first started officially dating, Corey would say he was coming down to the Gingrich's house. And she would laugh, because I'm one of 5 kids, and she thought, yeah, you're 16 and you're going to hang out with the Gingriches, I bet. But we hung out daily for months and talked on the phone and wrote notes before either of us had the guts to make a move or to acknowledge it and say anything to one another. There was no way that I was going to tell him I liked him and be rejected. So think of that, your own experiences as you began venturing in love, and where you have ventured since then. I'm sure we have all grown from those first experiments, from that place of unknowing and wondering about our worth, to the place where I hope we reside now, where more often than not we know we are lovable, and that it's not so much the choice of rejection or acceptance as choosing to live in love for ourselves. I really want to bottle up that intersection and to bottle up the call that lures us to move into love instead of fear. But apparently that's not possible. I came across a book this past week that helped me reframe this question I have about the intersection and wanting to find the answer so once and for all humanity we can finally learn from pain and choose love instead. The author wrote, "Was it not love that injured you in the first place? And is it not your love that makes you care enough to miss it now?" A few pages later, he spoke directly to my question, pointing out how ridiculous it is, actually. It's Gerald May in the book The Awakened Heart. And he wrote, "We cannot justify or defend our yes to love. What kind of explanation can we give? All we can honestly say is, I just wanted to. Inside, we may know it is the great passion of our life and that it is somehow meant for everyone. But from the outside, it may sound like nothing more than a whim, a childish idealism, perhaps even selfishness." He says our hearts ache for the fullness of love. I laughed when I read this. It happened to be one of the first books I started reading in preparation for this sermon, and you gotta love it when the very first chapter of the first book gives you answers and reframes your sermon, because he basically cast my question aside and expanded my viewpoint. He said, "We are created by love, to live in love, for the sake of love." This has been confirmed to me over and over again as parents celebrate with me the expected birth of our first child. So many parents, regardless of how children come into their lives, whether biological or through marriage, through foster care or adoption or teaching, they have told me how I can't even begin to imagine how much I'm going to love this child and how much he is going to change our lives. My best friend said the primary reason she wants to have a second child is that she loves her husband and her child already so endlessly that she can't fathom it's possible to love anymore, but she knows that she would, and she wants to know what that would be like. That's why she's my best friend. This moves me, our desire to say yes and to grow in love. Gerald May agreed, but in his book he said it differently. He said, "Such statements may be true, but they miss the point of love. Love is not a means to any end. Love does not promise success, achievement, fulfillment, or any other prize. Love is an end in itself, a beginning in itself. Love cannot be used. It can only be embraced and trusted. Love exists only for love." Love is more than the answer. It is the point. I really want an answer, but I guess I'll accept this, that love exists only for love, because it resonates with my experience. I wish I could bottle it up and handle it to everyone so at that intersection they would choose the path that I have found most meaningful. I wish I could hand it to myself in those moments when I don't recognize I actually have a choice and I could go a different way. But like everyone else, I have not found a way to use love, only to embrace it and trust it. May we all embrace and trust love. May we notice when love busts us wide open into an unfettered, blooming new galaxy. May we notice, give thanks, and give ourselves ever more fully into love. Amen.